for 30 odd.
So he's not new to the hobby. He joined this club last year, so some of you won't have seen the batch. Some of you may do, but obviously you're only on a weekend, aren't you, really? Because of that thing called work. So
I do try and make it now and again in the week, but it's...
Oh, and kids as well, yeah, ferrying them around.
Yes.
So anyway, I'll hand you over to
Dad taxi.
Rob.
So, I'm going to talk to you about making lithium-ion batteries. And I guess I'm going to start with saying why I do it. And it's because I had a couple of horrible LiPo fires. The first one, completely out of the blue. I had an old 4S battery in one of these bags. I came into the garage in the morning and there was just black smoke in the garage. I hadn't known anything about it. I opened up, the bag, and there was 3 LiPos gone.
I've got to go home.
Just
That's all I clear in the post for that.
It scared the living daylights out of me. It really did, because this blind panic.
I know the feeling. They're going in the garden now.
So did the bag contain it all?
Yes.
It didn't actually. Did it just smoke, or did it actually?
It was
burn?
it was a pile of flakes. It completely disintegrated. Literally, there was just a pile of ash. And unfortunately, because I've got 7, 8 LiPos in one of those bags.
It didn't go.
They didn't all go.
Oh wow.
Not that time. But I had another one go.
Was that the ones that were only partly damaged in it?
Yes. Well, the second one was really scary because I put it on charge in a bag. Okay, there were a couple of other LiPos in the bottom, but I went up for a shower. Jo said, my wife, she said, "Oh, we're having a barbecue." Oh shit! So I ran down the stairs into the garage, opened the door. Sure enough, the smoke came out the garage. Opened the front of the garage to get the airflow through, and I could see the bag gone completely. So the LiPo had gone, and I couldn't get near it because obviously it's lithium smoke, it's toxic.
This was charging. This one.
It was charging, and then the cable, the extension cable that was running underneath that, tripped the house. So the power went down in the house. And the trouble was, the bag started to expand because the other LiPos were starting to get hot. And at this point, I'm crapping myself because my wife just phoned the fire brigade and they ended up coming round. And what they did, they put breathing apparatus on and swept the whole lot into a bucket, believe it or not, into water. So top tip, if ever you get stuck, just sweep it into a bucket and then walk away. It was a metal bucket. So anyway, that put the heebie-jeebies up me enough to think, okay, I can't keep doing this. This is dangerous, and my kids had to come out of the house and all sorts, so it was horrible. So I looked into lithium ion because the big difference is they have a metal case, so they're like your standard cells that your AA batteries that you buy at home. So they're a lot more puncture resistant compared with those. So that's one thing, that they're a lot more robust. And the other thing is, when I looked into it, whereas one of those will probably do about 200 cycles, 200 charges, these 1,000. So massive difference, or should be a massive difference in the lifetime. And then the more I looked into it, the more I realised that actually they're more power dense. So this is where is it now? That is a 4S 2,500 milliamp hour battery. So if you compare that, and I didn't bring it with me, I meant to a standard 4S 3,000 milliamp, it's another 50% heavier than this. So if you, pass that around and have a feel, but it's bulky, but it's not a heavy battery. So yeah, and the same goes for the 6S. So that's a 6S 4,000 milliamp hour. That's a 6S 4,500 milliamp hour. So again, you feel the difference between those two. That's 30% lighter than your standard one. So it's a huge difference.
So I presume the difference is greater as the bigger the batteries, like the 6S compared to the 4S, I guess.
This one's been my greatest achievement. This is a 6S 2-pole, and I'll explain why I've done that in a minute. But that is a little bit heavier than my 6S 4000 there, but that's 9,000 milliamps.
That's what, 9,000?
9,000. So your big EDF, my 90mm EDF, I'll probably get about 6 or 7 minutes flight, whereas I was getting 3 on the 4,000 milliamp. And actually, it's not that much bigger or heavier. So I'll explain now the reason the two-pole makes a difference. So the limiting factor with these is the power output. So you can't quite get the same peak power output from a lithium ion that you can from a LiPo. So the 4S there that's going round, just for comparison, there's a 4S good condition LiPo on one of my models at home. I'll get about 750 watts. With that one, I get about 650 watts. So it's about 10-15% down on the peak power. So the reason that that's the case is the current output that these can do. So this one here, which is one of the cells using the 4S, can do about 25 amps, okay, maximum power output, which for a 4S is a little bit too low, really.
Can't you buy those up to 70 amp, is it?
No, not at this size.
Oh,
You
I see, they're
can.
bigger.
These are 70 amps.
Oh, I see, they're physically bigger.
Yeah, and that's I won't put those together. That's the one I use in my 6S batteries.
The grey one is 25 amps.
Yeah.
And the blue is 70.
Yeah. So in
So you can make a 4S with the blue one, you can get them in the model.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a 4,500 milliamp hour cell, that one. So it's quite a big capacity.
What's the smaller cell?
That's a 2.5. In fact, no, it's 2,800. Yeah, P28.
Cool.
If that 30% lighter, does that mean that the plane doesn't need the same amount of energy?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It helps.
it does.
It does.
So they fly lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I use those 6S's in my Extreme Flight 3D aircraft, and it's great. You know, I've got less weight in the battery, so it floats more.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite have the peak power, but then I've got a 2-to-1 power ratio on those. So if you think about it, when you're putting your motor in and you power it appropriately, it actually makes no difference to you. You just have to think about it when you put the install in.
Don't overprop it then.
Yeah.
Don't not too much pitch.
Yeah. But the reason I do the 2-pole is the current handling. So that 6S 2-pole there has got each kind of cell has got 2 of these in parallel. So that can handle 140 amps. That one there, which means 240 amps at 40 odd volts. That will handle up to 5,000 watts of power. So I was really
That would do
impressed
more
with it.
than the LiPo. What's the LiPo? Pretty much LiPo.
Yeah, so that was the shocker for me. So that 6S LiPo would give me about 90 amps. I was running 120 on that on the same model. So it gave me sort of an extra 20% power.
Because you paralleled up each.
Yeah.
So you've got more cells in. You can have 12.
And so you've got more capacity, more current handling for actually not much more weight.
You just need to be able to get it in the model, of course.
Yes, that's the limiting factor.
Bigger, taller, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have to
Yeah,
change
it's
anything
size,
else of the
it's shape.
circuitry?
What models you've got, isn't it?
Big models, they fit in, won't they?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
good question, Steve. So actually, you change very little. So they charge the same as on the same charge as your LiPo. So you can normally select lithium ion or lithium LiPo. The bit that tripped me up a little bit when I first put them in my aerobats is the clever speed controllers detect when the voltage sags, and if it sags below a certain level, it puts you into emergency mode. These when they're running single pole, so what that one there, the voltage sags a little bit more than a LiPo, and it put me into emergency mode, so I was effectively dead stick. So what I did, I adjusted the speed controller cut-off point to that lower point, and it was fine. They've been fine ever since. The other bit to kind of say, they can be run to lower voltages than LiPos safely. So a LiPo, anything, I think it's anything below about 3.2, if I remember correctly. I'm sure I remember.
Well, it's about 3 volts that you've killed.
Yes, exactly. And I nearly crashed my Venom because of that. Dave was there that day, running it was almost brand new, one of these. I'd been in the air 3 minutes, come round for finals, completely lost power. I nearly lost the model. Got it down, and one of these cells had kind of bulged, and that's because I dropped the voltage too low on the LiPo. Whereas these, they'll take a lot more before they degrade. So you can safely run these down to 2.7 volts. Okay, you get a little bit of a dip in power, but you can safely run them to 2.7 volts. It just gives you a lot more headroom, a lot more kind of trouser factor before you actually have to get it down.
Do you still have to charge the storage charge on them, Rob, or does it? That's what I thought.
They're not sensitive to charge condition at all.
No.
So you can leave them full.
You can leave it
It
full.
wouldn't really harm them.
Yeah,
Or
there's
you
no-
can
there's no
leave them
guide.
empty as well.
You what, sorry?
Can leave them empty
And you
as
can
well.
leave them empty.
What about the charging rate? Is it any quicker or longer?
No, it's not quicker.
Still 1C.
Yeah, I tend to stick to 1C, 1.5C. Because of my experiences with the LiPos, I wouldn't charge fast anyway.
Yeah.
I've got an innate fear of charging fast.
So when you charge LiPos then, do you charge below what the rating is on them? So if it's a 2200, they say charge it at 2.2.
Yeah.
I would do it at 2 or 1.8. It takes longer,
Same as
but it's
same as-
kinder, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
So-
and these are the same.
Yeah. But
Just treat them with respect.
I mean, I've
I always stuck yours on 4.
I know.
but I've charged the
Came back like
6S.
balloons.
I've charged the 6S at 6 amps. It's fine. Doesn't get warm. It's
Probably one of the challenging things for a lot of members would be with all the speed controllers in the different models they've got. It can be a pain knowing how to set the different voltage.
Yeah. I can
Where all
imagine.
bleeps, unless you've got the instructions for them.
Yeah.
Which, you know, Hobby King, you don't get anything, do you?
A lot of them you
So it's
can't
like-
set really set, can you?
No.
Sorry?
A lot of them you can't set.
A lot of them haven't got a cut-off.
No,
I don't know.
no.
Right.
So if they haven't, it's not a problem then.
Oh, I see.
But if they have, then you need to be a little bit careful.
But the ones that have, you can usually
You can normally
reset.
set them.
Yeah.
Or
if
you
know
need-
how.
But it's getting you.
So you need to
instructions
practice
for that
more
one,
your
both
dead stick.
finding them, downloading them. Yeah.
When you join the batteries together,
Yes.
you just use standard solder.
No.
I'll show
show
you
you in
that
a minute.
in a second. I've brought my welder with me to show
Right,
you.
okay.
That's just cooling.
I was going to say, is it just cooling?
Yeah.
And why don't you do it on the other pack?
Tell you the honest truth, because I downloaded both of these from Thingiverse. That came with cooling. That one didn't.
Okay, because I was just wondering exactly the same. Is it actually required or not?
So you
I mean-
3D printed the case.
Yes. So
What did you print that out of?
PLA.
Oh,
So that's standard PLA, and the design I just literally downloaded. The only modifications I made, you see there's tiny little holes in there, as well as the kind of gaps in the cells. The tiny little holes so I can run the battery balance lead cables through, because they need to go up and down inside the battery. So, but yeah, standard PLA, so it probably cost me about 30p to print that out.
Plus the cost of the printer.
I think I've already got my money's worth out of the
Yeah,
printer.
well, I can get a piece of plastic and a handle and have the same.
Yeah.
So when you fly with those, do they ever get, do they feel warm when you take them out like LiPos do, or?
They do get warm, but not as warm as a LiPo. I mean, you see me fly. I don't fly gently. So when you've done kind of a flight with one of those 3D aircraft, they come down warm.
They're pleasantly warm up.
Yeah, but nothing hot. No. And the same with the 4S that hasn't got any cooling. What I will say is I haven't done a full flight with this, but I've run it on the ground for several minutes, and it was fine. You know, running 100 plus amps. Yes, it got warm, but it wasn't hot. It wasn't you know, grit your teeth job.
Where'd you buy the cells from?
Okay, so Fogstar in Redditch.
Was that Frog Star?
Fogstar.
Fogstar.
Fog. Yeah. FOG star.
If they've got a counter that you can just go
Black
to.
smoke.
As in smoke, yes.
You don't know how much that costs.
So, I bought these on Friday, and you get 20% off on Fridays.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Every Friday.
Yeah.
It seems, I haven't had one this week or last week.
I just used last week's.
Did you?
The week before.
Never
Discount
mind then,
code.
did you choose Wednesday, Thursday?
Every week I get an email,
What's the
20% off
of the day?
Friday.
Lots of queues on a Friday. I don't know what's going on.
So I bought these, which are, they're good sales. I mean, 70 amps, 4,500 milliamp hours. I bought 6 of them for 35 quid. So it's cheaper than a 6S LiPo. Obviously you've got your battery leads and your balance leads that are on top of that. But if you buy those in bulk, actually you can put yourself together a decent 6S LiPo for about 40 quid.
So Rob, why are people not making them commercially then? For the purpose, if they're better.
Yeah, I don't know. I have seen a couple.
Yes,
So-
that smart one that we saw up at
Yeah.
there's a Spectrum, I think it was, wasn't there?
I'm alright for them.
Those
What do you know?
smart, those
Not
Spectrum
the other one.
smart batteries.
Just running.
Do some orange.
Spectrum do the smart batteries.
Yeah.
Smart.
That's it, that's
But
what
they're,
I was- that's
but
what-
they're LiPos, aren't
No,
they?
they're not, they're
I think
those.
they are like, they might be.
They're solid hard case cells, so they're those and they're round.
But I think those smart batteries, you're probably talking 100 quid, aren't you?
Yeah.
They're
Oh,
so
yeah.
expensive.
Yeah.
But they are the same thing, they don't have to be charged for a certain
Storage
voltage
charge.
for
Yeah.
storage and things like that, so they've got to be the same as those.
But commercially, somebody's going to look at it and sort of say, well, you can get 4 times the flight, cycle rate. There's going to be a weight difference, so I'm not going to sell it for,
Not
well,
gonna
I
sell
can
it.
make it and 20% off. I'm going to sell it for at least 2-3 times
They're not
more
gonna
than a
sell something.
LiPo,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, the Spectrum smart LiPos, or whatever they are, the smart batteries, are twice the price easily of a normal LiPo that
Yeah.
they do.
Yeah. I mean,
Really expensive.
that was my go-to before I swapped onto the lithium ions. They're 120 quid for 2 on Amazon. Yeah, so 40 quid for a 6S. For more power, more cycles, I wouldn't go back now.
But if you wanted more than 70 amps, you'd have to double up on that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So if you run, I mean, obviously you could design it to be sort of this sort of size. But if I've tried these, I've got a 74-inch 3D Aerobat, and that pulls 100 amps, and this does it comfortably, and it's more powerful than 2 LiPos, and they're lighter as well. So on certain airframes, I guess it wouldn't work because of the bulk. But for most of my aircraft, it works absolutely brilliantly.
So the only downside then is the actual physical fit, I suppose, getting it in the plane. Is that what you're saying?
The physical fit, because of the peak power requirement. So if you've got something that's power hungry, then you need to think about whether you need a 2-pole battery or you need to parallel 2 batteries up. Because the other thing I've done, I've run 2 of these in parallel. So in the trainer that I was teaching the lad with the other week, I was running 2 of these, and I've made up a parallel lead, which gives me 5,000 milliamp hours. So I think that's the reason to double up, and that's the reason it's a bit more bulky. But if you don't mind, if you've got the space to do that, it makes a huge amount of sense.
Yeah, if you've got like an EDF jet 6S, they tend to be narrow sort of battery trays. But you could build one, I suppose, in a configuration that's not fat, but it's longer.
Yeah, but then you've got the centre of gravity.
You have got the CAG to bear in mind,
But that when in my Venom, that's an EDF foam jet, 90 millimeters. With one of these, I needed, I think it was 60 grams of lead to get the CAG right. Whereas with that, I don't obviously need any, and I've got the power. So I think for certain aircraft, it makes it.
whether it just goes checking that the cells will go in the orientation you want them
Yeah.
on those sort of models.
Yeah.
Your 3D sort of stuff, it's quite easy, there's plenty of space.
It is.
But it's certain models tight on that.
Yeah. So I've struggled with gliders. So with thin fuselage gliders, you can't get the big cells in. And I've thought about whether I could make a single. It's really really complicated, not easy.
We're going to do and fold the, I think,
Yeah.
tubes.
Yeah.
Could be done.
It could be done. Takes a bit of thinking.
Yeah.
The smaller cells are cheaper as well. So whereas those are about £5 or £6 a cell, these are about £4 or £5 a cell. I'm trying to think the numbers off the top of my head. So you can build a 4S for about 20-25 quid. So again, a little bit
So you
cheaper.
get a lot more cycles out of it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you've got to buy there's other stuff to buy on
Yeah,
top.
I find it's a difference.
Go on, Dave.
So then 2 poles, what's the difference? Oh, that's lost me a little bit.
So 2 pole is effectively
Well,
Power-
two in parallel, isn't it?
paralleling your cells.
So you've got 100, doubling up the current,
You're right.
so you can have 140, it's 70 amps.
So still 3 volts per cell, but rather than one cell with 3 volts, but another one next to it, the positive and the negative from the two of them.
Oh, you put negative and negative together, and positive and
Yeah,
positive.
so effectively, that's the 2 positive ends. You
So you
weld
put that
them,
in series with the next pair.
then you
Double
weld
the
them,
oomph.
and then you go across, and you do it so that it's paralleled all the way down the battery.
Oh, I see what you mean.
And that just doubles the current capacity. So it gets around that peak power issue, because all of a sudden your 4S will do 50 amps, which is plenty for a 4S, and your 6S will do 140 amps, which is
Check the internal resistance of the batteries before you parallel them up. Check them in any way to make sure that they're going to kind of charge balanced, if you want.
I check the voltage, so I use my voltage meter just to check that they're all the same before I weld them. And then as you weld them, you check that the voltage stands out correctly as you go through. I've never checked the resistance.
No,
I've got a complaint.
it's obviously more complicated to check
3S valves.
internal resistance.
I've got some planes,
Yeah.
Which you put it on the load and
2 to
stuff
3
like
inches.
that.
Yeah.
It's just thinking, if you're checking the voltage, I suppose it's going to be the same kind of thing.
Okay, and
The
it's comes to
same
6S.
Yeah.
match.
2 to 3 X's.
Yeah. So, the other bit to talk to you about is the welding. So I don't solder these together, I spot weld them, and that was the expensive bit. Because I knew I was going to be running big currents, because I wanted them for my EDF. After that incident I had, that's where I said I was going to build a LiPo, lithium ion to do it. I put a bit of research in, and some people were soldering them, which isn't good for your cells. It's quite difficult to do when you've got big thick cables. Some people were spot welding, but the limiting factor generally is the tab between the batteries. You have to be really careful you don't underdo that, because if you've got 100 amps running through it, it would be quite easy to burn them out if you haven't used the right material. So I use 2 materials. These are both available from AliExpress. You buy them in a reel, and they arrive in a couple of weeks. I mean, literally, I think that was about £4.
What's that made of? Nickel.
So that, is nickel.
Oh, nickel.
Yes. And there's a reason for that. Then I've also got this, which is copper.
Yeah.
And nickel, although it's really easy to spot weld, it's a really shit conductor. So it's sort of about 20% of that of copper. So in order to get the same current handling, you either, put 5 of these on your battery, which you can do. People do that. If you haven't got a welder that's up to it, or
You mean 5 spot welds?
five strips.
Oh, 5 strips.
5 layers.
Yes. So 5 layers?
Yes, 5 layers. Yeah.
What, you spot weld for all 5?
You do them one at a time,
Oh,
spot
one
weld
to
into
one.
each other.
Right.
Yeah. Or what I've done is something called a copper nickel sandwich. Sounds a bit odd, but this copper strip, you can't weld it directly to the cells because it's so conductive. It's really difficult to spot weld copper. You need an industrial grade welder to do that, and even then, that much power onto the top of the cell is not sensible. So what you do, you sandwich them together like this, and then you put them on top of the cells, and you weld the nickel, and the copper welds through the nickel. So if you tried to weld this on its own, you wouldn't be able to do it. But if you want to gather around, I can show you how I do this.
So the nickel on the top, copper
Yeah.
on the cell.
Now the one thing I'm not going to do, at the bottom, is actually weld 2 cells together tonight, and that's because on these batteries, you've obviously got the positive, but the case is negative, and the only thing that's separating the case is the shrink wrap. So what I normally do, I print off caps on the 3D printer. They're like washers, but PLA washers, and I stick them to the end, and that gives you a bit of insulation from the weld, because when you weld, it can damage the shrink wrap quite easily if you haven't got those caps on, and that causes all kinds of problems if that happens.
Another fire.
Yeah.
So you have the nickel on the top and the copper
So the
underneath
nickel on the top
battery.
and the copper there. Yeah.
So you put the copper in touch with the
Yeah,
the battery.
copper
The
down
battery.
first. Yeah. And then what you do, this is my welder. I'll explain the welder in a minute. So you can place that there and that there, and I've just fairly far apart, and then I've got a pedal down here. But I need some light. I've got some more pedal. Oh, there we go. There we go. That was the weld done. And that's it.
So what? That's
So
done.
that's now stuck.
2 weld. Is that
So
done
it's 2 spot
spots?
welds. Yeah.
So you do a few more.
So you
take
Tonight
it
I normally
4 or
do
6.
kind of 6
Yeah.
on each.
What? Yeah.
So but you need both.
So does that change with the, if you're doing a 70 amp one, do you try and get as many as you can, or?
No, not really.
I suppose you've got the
I
copper
try
in
and get as many as I
contact.
can, to actually make the quality of that as good as you can.
So
Look
with
at
that then, like that, would you do like another copper and then another nickel on top of that after?
No.
That is it?
Yeah.
But if you wanted to do multi-layers, you'd have to do them all in one hit.
No.
you
So
just
you,
one after the other.
you could put that one, that, weld it,
Yeah.
then put another strip on, weld it, then so you could
Yeah,
do it
but
that way.
if you wanted to incorporate the copper with the nickel, you only got to do it like that,
Yes.
and that's it.
Yes.
So you
And-
don't need any more nickel on top of that.
No, no.
That's because of the resistance.
Yeah, yeah.
So the
Because
copper,
nickel's crap.
Yeah.
but the copper's brilliant.
So one strip of copper is enough with the
Yes.
nickel. Yeah.
And I only know that because I've tried and tested it. I mean,
Could you not just cut a little bit of nickel just on the top there, not leave the tap, just for the spot welding purposes, and
could.
just use the copper, just cut a little square.
Yeah, it's holding it though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's holding it, I suppose, but
could.
it's just sort of keeping it, because
But also
it's
you
only
know-
there for the purpose of spot welding. Isn't it?
but when you're going between the cells, I mean, that's different, isn't it? But when
Yeah.
you go between the cells, it makes sense
Yeah,
to
yeah.
have it all the way across.
Yeah.
And I think it probably is a bit
It's
neater
easier
as well.
that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mechanically.
Depends where it's going, I suppose.
Do you
where-
get a
It's
lot of
almost
heat off the
self-supporting
weld?
as well, isn't it, that?
No.
Sorry.
Do you get any heat off the weld?
So off the weld, no, but these, yes. So after about, you can just about do a 6S in one go. By the end of it, I'm burning my fingertips on these.
So it doesn't interfere with it doesn't. So the heat doesn't interfere with the integrity of the battery.
Oh no, so that's the reason I spot weld.
Yeah.
You don't do any damage to the cell with a spot
Because
weld.
the current goes across it.
Instant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It doesn't
instant.
go through the.
No,
it doesn't
okay,
go
yeah.
across.
Yeah.
That's why you'd spot weld rather than solder.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I still don't avoid soldering, because once you've welded them together, on the tabs themselves, you need to solder on the balance leads
Yeah,
and
of course,
the main
yeah.
battery leads.
But you're
But
not soldering to the battery, are you?
no, you're
No,
soldering
you
to the
sold them
tabs.
to the tabs. And the copper would probably take the heat away anyway,
Yeah.
wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And what material is the pole of the battery made of?
There's a good question. I don't know.
What was that for? What
Yeah,
did you
the
say?
actual, the body of the.
What's the pole of the battery made out of? Do you think that's
Probably,
nickel as
isn't it?
well? Or is it
Yeah.
nickel plated or something?
Yeah.
Probably nickel plated on.
Yeah,
So
cheap.
Copper
Very
and then
cheap.
nickel plate.
what I tend to do once I've welded them up with the tabs is then cover them with this electrical insulation tape. So I kind of wind it round in all directions so that all of the tabs are covered, which stops moisture getting to it. And then depends on which design I'm doing. So on the 6S, this just clips on, so it covers all of the metal tabs. You can probably see on there. If you looked carefully, you'll see the metal tabs between the batteries. So you just clip that on, and then heat shrink over the whole lot.
Is there any benefit of the air holes that you're creating there?
Yeah,
Does it let them vent?
It's heat, yeah.
Yeah,
Dissipate.
And I don't know whether it's needed, but that's the design I found on.
So I thought of putting
Funny
all
thing
the
is
way
online,
through.
you think you know.
That's what I thought it
Yeah.
Could
YouTube.
You could do.
Blow the air through.
Yeah.
Have
Could
some air
do.
flowing through.
bother.
So Rob, you said the expensive part was the welder, which looks like it. So how much are we talking about for the welder to do this then?
Yeah, so that was 200 quid. And I had to import it from Germany. But the reason I went for this one was so that it could do this copper nickel sandwich. So standard welders will struggle a little bit to do the copper nickel because of the power that you require to weld.
What means
Is that set to its maximum or?
No,
No.
I mean that's variable.
83 joules.
What do you mean?
Quite, quite a beast.
And it's just foot operated, you just trigger
Yeah,
it.
you can set it up so that it's automatic actually. So as soon as you,
So as soon as it sees the connection.
it does it. Yeah, but I prefer it to be a bit more controlled.
And what's its spec? Sorry, what's its name? It's a K
It's called
weld.
a K-weld, yeah, and I can put a link in the WhatsApp group if any of you are interested. But I did lots of reading up on it, and it's the most powerful hobby welder you can get, and as I say, it'll cope with this, whereas a lot of welders won't.
What sort of load does it take off the batch? I mean, obviously not much. Just a
Again, I mean, they give you a spec for the cranking amps of the battery. That's the main bit, and this was slightly below, being a leisure battery, but it still copes absolutely fine. You can see all these batteries I've built with that one. I've only charged it once, so it's been absolutely fine.
If you run it, you can use your Tesla, can't you? Really? And just
Absolutely, yeah.
And where do you buy all your balance leads and cables? Do they? Do you buy them?
Yeah, I can't remember. I think I just bought them in bulk from Amazon actually.
Right. They just come with a
Yeah.
the what's they call the connection, that white one, the JST is it?
Yeah,
JST, you know.
I mean, obviously you have to be a bit careful with understanding where they get welded to.
Yeah.
But once you've done it a
You've got to
couple
get
of
in the
times,
right order.
yeah, and I've done it in the wrong order.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. But
So
if
when
you,
you solder that, so you're soldering, because the nickel and the copper aren't connected where you're soldering that. Or do you soldering that onto the?
so what you tend to do.
Oh, I see. You
On that.
on each.
You
Yeah,
would
you're on the
solder-
top.
I would solder on the space between the two to minimise the heat transfer.
Onto the nickel or the copper. They're not connected. Well, let's say they're not
Onto the
connected.
nickel, yeah. They're against each other.
Yeah,
aren't
they're
they?
against,
So-
but they're not.
Not
fused together.
No.
fused.
What kind of solder
Does
do
the
you
welder,
use?
does the welder have to run off the battery?
Standard.
Can
It's
it
lead
Standard.
solder, but
It's lead
So when you,
solder, yeah.
so where's the earth going to then? If you've got one of those for each cell, haven't you, positive? So that's a full
That, measuring in series, aren't they?
yeah, so you
First one to the next
Or a
thing.
converter?
Yeah,
so what you say, first cell, first positive.
Yeah.
The next one along
Yeah,
goes to
sorry.
the end of that.
You're better off just line it
The
out.
next
in a
Think
line.
about them as voltage
as a
jumps as you go around.
visual.
So that's 0 volts. That's 3.7.
Yeah.
That, you know, the next one up here is kind of 7.4.
Right.
And you've got 11. You just
If you put them in a line, Rudy,
Yeah.
if you lay those in a line
Yeah.
and just work out, you know, a negative at that end and 3 point, whatever, work
Yeah.
your way along. But it's connected in a block, so you've got to
Yeah.
make sure you connect them to the right
Right
places.
yeah.
And even if you know, I've got it wrong before and got one in the wrong place. It's still just a balance lead. It's just looking at the wrong place.
So with the balance lead, then on a LiPo, it's never sensitive if you get it the wrong way around or anything, isn't it? If you plug it into like a battery checker and that, and you plug that lead in, is it the same with these?
Yeah, absolutely the same.
Yeah.
Don't plug it in your charger though the wrong way.
Yeah.
Not that I've done it.
Can you run the welder off
Can you put it in
mains?
your
Well, you
charger?
can.
Or does it have to be
You
run
must have
off
been
a-
ham-fisted.
You can
a
connect
battery,
them,
or can you
and
run
then
it through a
you can go in.
transformer?
No,
It's
you'd
connect-
have to
it makes a connection.
use a big capacitor.
You get a bit of a splash.
Yeah, you would.
You'd have to put a capacitor on. You need the instantaneous.
Right.
It's the cranking amps that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they could
Instantaneous.
yeah.
So a typical charging power supply struggle because of the power requirement, the instant power requirement.
Every time you weld all the
Yeah. Oh, lights will
low
go out,
internal
yeah.
resistance to the
You
battery.
can use all your old lipos.
Can I pose something to you now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That would teach
Question.
them, wouldn't it?
Right. The idea that the copper conducts across and won't weld through.
Yeah.
If you put a nickel on, why does it weld?
Yeah.
Because the contact point is the same.
Yeah.
Is it just the duration?
I think it's the lower conductivity of the nickel.
The nickel.
Yeah,
But
no,
it
but
produces heat.
You're talking
If
about
you run a
electricity or
superconductor,
heat.
The
you
resistivity.
stick that 200 amps through and generate no heat whatsoever, so it won't weld. So if you give
no,
it a high,
you can weld anything if you've got enough.
And I think
Yeah,
that's maybe the
going
point.
the
Yeah,
extreme.
haven't got enough.
and saying if it was a superconductor.
So are we actually saying that the spot weld itself, you're producing the heat and melting the surface of the
through the current.
2 points,
yeah.
aren't you?
The current produces heat
Between
at
2
those points.
That's the copper.
And the copper's
Yeah.
The worse the conductor, the better the heat.
The better the
The heat,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. So it's actually fusing the two, but only because the nickel is getting hot
Yes.
and heating
I think the nickel fuses through it.
There you go. I'm glad there
What's
was
the current
some more
rating of the
clever
copper?
people than me.
I
So
wonder what would happen if you use silver.
yeah,
It's
It's
the
a
same
very
as-
good,
same
no,
as
but it's a
Silver's
much,
better than copper.
it's a much lower
Yeah.
conductivity.
Yeah, but it's more
But,
expensive.
oh, cheap silver, isn't it? But the melting point is much lower than the copper, and it might
Just do it.
do it with silver straight on.
to answer your question,
No.
or not answer your question, I don't know. I put a lot of research into finding out whether this
If you
should
look
be
at
enough.
that, and if you look at the cables we're using,
Yeah.
and you look at the gauge,
Yeah.
that's nothing, is it?
Well, no, actually it is, because if you imagined all of your cables
Yeah.
flattened out and joined together, that's probably very similar.
If you take
Cross-sectional
Cross-sectional
area.
Still
yeah.
find that.
3 mil square cable, which will take around about 50 amps, right?
Yeah.
Flatten it out, it's about half that size.
Yeah. And I
That's
guess
made up of 28 strands of 0.3.
Yeah, but, I mean, I've come from high energy and the rest of it. Even though the copper might not be capable of taking the current, it's thin, it will dissipate any heat. But the main thing is the surface area or the distance between is virtually no resistance. You know, there is
There's no
resistance
volt
there,
drop
but
or
it's not.
anything on that, is it? Nothing.
You know, if it was a
Yeah.
metre length, if it was a metre length, it would be a different
yeah,
thing. So.
yeah. I mean, I guess I know it works because
Yeah.
I've run 120
Yeah.
amps through that, and it barely got warm. And I guess that was the crunch one. If that had melted the tabs,
Yeah.
I would have known it doesn't work. So.
As you say, if you take it out and it doesn't even feel warm,
Yeah.
then
You know it's doing all
you're
right.
doing all right.
Yeah.
Rather, you measure 120 amps, not on a standard multimeter.
No. So the 120 amps is on my power meter. So when I've got it all installed in the aircraft, I've got a watt meter that I put in, and you can measure the amps on there.
A watt meter?
Yes.
Watt meter?
So we want to look at that.
You can buy them for your
model.
Yeah,
You just plug it into between your battery and the ESC. You just
Rob,
plug it
next time
between
you
and
patch.
run it on the ground.
That is really interesting.
I've got a video of the Venom running with that battery. If you're interested, I can show you the power meter.
So what's the downside? The downsides are
The bulk,
effort,
Physically a bit larger.
physically bigger,
physically bigger,
No, but
effort in making it yourself.
yeah,
Too.
and
You could get
you have to think about the peak power requirement. You know, if you need high amps, more than so if you think about how much power your model needs,
It's just
So 4S,
Oh, yeah.
2800, fly a Voltage Air or a Riot or something like that.
yeah, but you'll probably find with a Voltage Air, it's probably running 800 watts. So you
It's running
need
nothing.
probably 40 to 50 amps.
Yes.
It's nothing.
Yeah, this wouldn't be able to keep up with that
That.
in a single pole. So if you paralleled two of these together in your Voltage Air, that's capable of 50 amps then, and it'd probably keep up fine.
Those are the smaller cells. Though.
Yes, the smaller cells.
Well, the bigger cells, blue ones,
And they'd knock it off as easy as anything.
Yeah, yeah. So they're
so
capable
they're
of
physically a
70
little bit
amps.
bigger.
So
You
the
could
other
make
question
one
for you.
in a 4, which isn't that big, much bigger really, is it?
No.
4 of those blue ones,
No.
they'll deliver 70 amps.
pulled over on the way home.
Printed those out. I have seen designs where they sort of put two together and leave the whole thing down to make it more dense.
Okay.
Having tested these in the real world and felt the warmth of them, would you say that was a good idea or probably not?
I wouldn't do it.
You wouldn't do it?
No.
Fair enough.
Not knowing how low the melting point of hot glue is.
Yes. No, that's fine. It was just
I think on a hot day, if you were giving those some
some jib, they come apart.
But you wanted gluing them together, did you say? I couldn't
Well,
hear.
these, yeah, you're printing out these nice spaces, and they are quite well spaced. But if you physically wanted to get a smaller battery,
Oh, I see.
could you put the cells together and just run a bead of hot glue down to keep them together, then shrink wrap them?
But you could make a smaller, you could shrink
that's
that,
what I've done.
you
could,
Yes.
you could do the
print them,
same
yeah,
sort of design.
to make them closer.
Well, you could that one, yes.
Well,
I mean
let's say-
that's fairly tight.
When I say
But
shrink.
still,
Yeah.
well, yeah, there's
You
not,
could, make,
not a
you
lot
could,
to
you
the
could design one
couple of
where they're
inch.
almost touching.
That they are almost touching in there.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm going to say that's reasonably dense, isn't it?
it is.
You just need to make the end caps that they're
Yeah.
close together as close as possible.
What's the cost difference between the two sizes of battery?
So they're about £6 a cell. They're about £4 a cell.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's with the Friday discount.
Yeah.
So you're getting more value for money, really.
Where's
You
Foxstar
are.
in ready to that?
I think the biggest
Moon's
score,
boat.
actually,
Moon's boat.
in my opinion, the biggest score
just
is
down
200 or 300.
Oh, right.
It is a massive difference. Isn't it?
And they're bomb-proof.
Yeah.
Excuse the expression.
Yeah, yeah.
They are.
Yeah,
Yeah, you could drive over these. You wouldn't drive over your lipo and still want to be.
Do you want to some food up there?
Yeah.
We grab some food.
Just say big thanks first, though.
But is there any, have you got more stuff to?
No, that's it. And you got any questions? Just fire away.
Well, thanks, Rob.
That's
I mean, I'm
brilliant.
sure you
Yeah.
have questions.
Yeah,
That's
thank
really
you.
lovely.
Thanks for doing all the hard work.
Yeah, no, no problem at all.
Is there any charge for